Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Go ahead, Clemencia.
Good morning and good afternoon to all. Welcome to our ESMAP webinar, Sustainable Cooling in Off-Grid Rural Areas, Access to Energy and Clean Cooling for Multiple Sectors. To start, I would like to welcome very warmly and briefly our speakers, and in so doing, explain briefly how this event will take place. First, we will have an introduction with our ESMAP practice manager giving opening remarks, Chandra, and also opening remarks from Brian from EC for All. Afterwards, the leading authors of a new report on sustainable cooling in off-grid rural areas, the nexus between access to energy and to clean cooling, Leo Blight and Ben Hartley will present the key highlights of this report. Then this will be followed by a panel discussion of 4 guests that will be shifting from the main finding on the theory and best practice to the actual discussion of cases that are being prepared and implemented on ground to bring more clean cooling to countries in Africa and Asia. And then this will be followed by a Q&A sessions in which you are most welcome to write your questions in the chat box, and we will try to address them. Now, without any further ado, please welcome our ESMAP manager, Chandra, to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clemencia. Colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, good morning to all of you connecting from different parts of the world. I see there is already a healthy participation, over 50 people, and really pleased that we are organizing this jointly with our close partners of many years, SC for All. So this, the topic that brings us all together is a critical one on access to clean cooling in off-grid areas. The core of the topic is the temperatures are rising all over the world, and billions of people are dealing with this, and they don't have many ways to deal with the problem, to tackle the problem, whether it is for their business or households or any other walk of life. So in this webinar, we'll explore the nexus and synergies between different dimensions of off-grid cooling options for areas in off-grid areas, and see, learn both from practical experience as well as emerging knowledge in the sector on what we could be doing. It is evident to us, whether I'm in Vienna now and the temperatures are very high, unseasonably high, so is Washington is high, and so many other parts of the world. And I saw the news of more than 1,000 victims, 1,000 pilgrims killed and died who died in the pilgrimage in Hajj this time. It's really heart-wrenching that there's such things are happening. It's not a luxury, it is turning to a basic need, especially more than 1 billion people, 1.2 billion people currently are risk due to lack of access to cooling mostly in developing world, over 300 million in developing world as per SC for All's statistics, and this number is only going to rise to over 2 billion, 2.3 billion by 2030. So we all need to come together to find what solutions are there, what can be scalable, and what can be offered to our clients in developing countries. This is ESMAP is strongly committed to this agenda. We have a cooling program that was launched in 2020, and we have been focused on affordable cooling as well as both in off-grid areas as well as for urban areas and buildings and cities as well. as well as in other sectors such as agriculture, forestry, and so on. We have provided technical assistance to more than 30 countries already. These activities have informed over 4 billion in World Bank Group financing and estimated to save 24 million tons of CO2 as based on the we also have, based on the projects that we are financing, we also have a good partnership with the Green Climate Fund. We have a program, the Global Clean Cooling Facility, $157 million in 9 countries that we are working on. So we are happy to be organizing this and working closely with the SC4All on this. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Clemencia. Thank you very much. And I look forward to an interesting discussion on this complex but important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandra. Now, please, let's turn the floor to Brian from SC4All, to you.
Great. Thanks, Clemencia. And hello, all. Yeah, my name is Brian Dean. I am the Director of Energy Transition at SC4All. And when this project started, I was the head of cooling. So a lot has changed throughout this process, which has been great. A few years ago, it was SC4All's CEO and the former ESMAP practice manager that urged us to collaborate on opportunities to address sustainable cooling and off-grid and energy-constrained settings. And I'd really like to begin by thanking the ESMAP team for their collaboration in producing this report with us. And this has also yielded a really strong collaboration, both on this report and closer cooperation on cooling, as Chandra just mentioned. At SC4All, we've been working on raising awareness, building knowledge, and supporting governments to address access to sustainable cooling since 2017. And our work on the topic has focused on addressing the cooling needs of the most vulnerable, those whose health, safety, productivity, and nutrition depend on access to cooling. And that, particularly includes the rural poor that this report really starts to protect, a group that's really at high risk due to a lack of access to cooling. And in deciding to develop this report, the teams recognized 3 important challenges that need to be addressed. First, that more effort and resources have been invested in addressing cooling for urban environments and for people with higher incomes, rather than rural communities and particularly the rural poor. Second, that the rural cooling needs are more diverse than in the urban environments and, have really widespread potential benefits. And hopefully we'll hear a lot about that in the Q&A discussion later. And third, that sustainable energy access and underpinned by passive cooling and energy efficiency is necessary for rural communities to fully benefit from sustainable cooling. So these 3 challenges are exacerbated by gender inequalities and climate change, of course. As we know, we're in a warming world. In rural communities, women face challenges in accessing cooling services at home, at work, for their health and for their nutrition both. Women are more likely to experience food insecurity and are often overrepresented in the agricultural sector, where access to cooling really can improve the livelihoods, both quality of life and the jobs themselves. Climate change, from a extreme heat and beyond, as Chandra mentioned, is becoming increasingly visible and increasingly more dangerous, as mentioned with the deaths in Mecca. And rural communities really are at the front line of this crisis. And last month, temperatures in rural Pakistan did exceed 50 degrees Celsius. The good news is that this report describes the nexus between access to sustainable energy and cooling, showing opportunities for the development community to address it. So we're heading in the right direction. And SC4All, we've been advancing some of these opportunities in our work, notably on the integration of sustainable cold chains into electrification planning, including in both Malawi and Madagascar. So to close, thanks to the ESMAP team for your work in finalizing this report. We know that's a huge lift. It'll be an important signpost to the development community at large, and I hope it's the only beginning of expanded collaboration between SE4All and the World Bank on sustainable cooling. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of our partners that contributed, including Efficiency for Access, CLASP, the BASE Foundation, and FAO, among others. And SE4All looks forward to working with you all and using this document as a tool to advance access to sustainable cooling for everyone. Thank you so much. Back to you, Clemencia.
As you have seen, both for the introductory remarks of Chandra and of Brian, the importance of efficient and sustainable cooling in areas that were not a few years ago immediately coming to our mind when thinking about cooling, off-grid remote areas, is really established by the facts more and more. And with increasing temperatures, the impact in those areas and on the livelihood of those people is only accelerating. So that is the reason why we thought it was important to dedicate the first session to this report, the report on access to efficient cooling in off-grid areas, and talk about the key highlight of this piece of work, which is a collaboration between Sustainable Energy for All, ESMAP, and contributions of many people. So this will be what will occupy us in the next about hour. And in doing that, I think as I would moderate this session, and so what I would like just a couple of sentences to introduce the session in particular within the whole webinar, is that already in the introduction, we saw the complexity of what it means to bring cooling to off-grid areas. And if we take one thing from this report, as I hope you will agree with me after listening to Leo and Ben, is that it is a multiple and complex task. It is very much so a story of technologies and of advance on energy in off-grid areas, but by no means it is only that. It requires multiple dimension policies, business, and other things that will be more elaborated upon. And it takes a lot of institutional work, because neither us as development agencies nor the governments are used to work between energy, doctors, and agriculture, or talk about business models, the regulation, etc. So I just wanted, I think this is the most important aspect among many, that the book, the report that has been developed here can bring to us. And I will invite you to listen to Leo and Ben, which will dwell exactly on those multiple areas that are needed to make sustainable cooling in off-grid areas a reality. It takes time, it takes people, and it takes many dimensions. So Leo and Ben, now we give you the floor and would be most grateful if you can use the next 30 minutes to develop on that. And then if it comes very close to the time, I will let you know. Otherwise, look forward to listening to you. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Clemencia, and maybe I'll introduce myself first, and then perhaps Leo can introduce himself, and then we'll begin with a set of slides that'll take you through the report. So to begin, my name is Ben Hartley. I'm a program manager at Sustainable Energy for All, where, among other things, I lead our work, our programmatic work on sustainable cooling, which you heard a little bit about from Brian earlier. Over to you, Leo.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. So I'm with ESMAP. I'm a consultant who's been working with both IFC and World Bank on energy access now for around 15 years. And my role in the cooling space has been leading the development of the, if you like, the access to energy and cooling intersection for the last 4 years or so, where we've been focusing on the agricultural cold chain innovations and also the vaccine cold chain task force when we all had the tragic surprise of COVID about 4 years ago. I'd like to just move straight on with the report, but just one point to note is that I've been working predominantly on the Lighting Africa, Lighting Global programs, where we really saw a transformation in consideration of cooling wasn't even on the agenda. We really saw lighting as a revolution. You know, to access basic lighting was the step change from considering electricity was something you brought with the grid extension. And so I'm really excited about this new opportunity by seeing it has even more potential to be transformative by seeing cooling as the new foundation and the new frontier, if you like, of basic access to energy needs. It's incredibly challenging. Thank you. Over to you, Ben.
Great. Okay. And so while the slides come up, I'll give a little bit of background about what we'll talk about. Essentially, in the slides, what you're going to see is, you know, why is this a challenge? We're going to try and sort of define the nexus and the benefits of action. And we're going to talk a lot about the opportunities that are associated with that and the opportunities for the development finance community to take action at this nexus. So, you know, Brian outlined our work a little bit earlier and the focus of SE for All on the most vulnerable. One thing I want to highlight is the data and evidence work that SE for All does in the Chilling Prospects research series. This tracks global access to cooling gaps, and in that, you know, we think about who's at high risk. And we divide that category of high risk into two, the urban poor and the rural poor. And while the urban poor may outnumber the rural poor, as you heard, there remain, according to Chilling Prospects, over 300 million people living in high temperature rural areas where poverty and a lack of access to energy threatens their health and well-being. And so that brings us to the first slide here, or the next slide, where the key message is essentially that cooling is critical for rural communities. And comparatively, you know, as you heard, the cooling needs of the rural poor are more diverse than urban counterparts. And here we highlight on the left-hand side 3 of the cooling needs that the report covers. Human comfort and safety, where over 1.5, there will still be 1.5 billion rural residents living in the critical 9 countries to access to cooling that SE for All is defined in 2050. So it's not a challenge that's going away. Agriculture, food security, and nutrition, where food loss due to a lack of cold chain hinders economic potential of rural areas and exacerbates malnutrition. And then the third is healthcare, where inequities in the vaccine cold chain were exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic and are essential for future-proofing for malaria vaccines and potential future pandemics. On the right-hand side, you'll see, climate and gender inequities exacerbate the challenge and the challenge in addressing these 3 cooling needs. We're seeing, you know, as we said, the consequences of extreme heat in real time with increased mortality risk. It's not only mortality risk, it's risk to crops. And we know it will particularly impact the agricultural sector, and in particular, Africa, where energy access gaps are most significant. And then gender, as you heard, women and girls face specific challenges, are overrepresented in the agricultural sector, and are more likely than men to experience moderate or severe food insecurity. So if we could flip to the next slide. You know, this report looks into the opportunities that we have to meet key cooling needs in rural areas and the benefits of action at the nexus of cooling and energy access. So it's first important to define what we mean by that. You know, first and foremost, it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to deliver at the same time on the SDGs, climate adaptation, and mitigation. You'll see some examples on the screen, but what we're talking about here are 2 sides of the same coin. Electricity access can help meet critical cooling needs through, and it's accelerated through energy efficiency. Accelerating the uptake of, you know, active sustainable cooling solutions with limited or unreliable access to electricity will require some of the solutions you see here to be both efficient and available and affordable at lower levels of energy access. But at the same time, you know, I think it's important to understand that, you know, cooling services can drive demand for electricity access. and an increased level of electricity services in off-grid areas. So where cooling access can support economic activities through productive uses, and the additional revenues generated can help cover the costs of accessing electricity and cooling, especially when you combine it with some form of energy as a service, lease to own, or a pay-go model. So essentially just trying to show, and I won't go over all the examples, but the two sides to this coin where it's a mutually beneficial. And then we can go on to the next slide, please. And then I think after defining the concept, we should look at where there may be high impact opportunities to deploy solutions. So this is not the be all and end all, but it is an attempt to do that. So if you examine the overlap of countries where increasing rural access to 1, electricity, and 2, cooling would have a significant impact, it reveals the 19 countries in the middle. Combined, these countries are home to at least 248 million rural residents whose demand for electricity and cooling is likely to go unmet without combined energy and cooling access interventions. The rural populations of these 19 countries in particular, they represent over 50% of the world's total unelectrified rural population, and 80% of the rural poor population that we define in Chilling Prospects. Now, there can be challenges associated with human comfort and safety, agriculture, food security, nutrition, and healthcare outside of the 19 countries, of course. But this was just an attempt to sort of focus what we understand about the two topics to show some potentially high impact countries. So if we can flip to the next slide, over the next few slides, and Leo will take over from me, you'll hear about different cooling solutions and the business models and the financing mechanisms that are beginning to make them more affordable for off-grid customers. To set that up, we wanted to highlight this chart, which is a product of a research collaboration between SC4All and CLASP from 2021 that assessed how energy efficiency was improving the availability of cooling solutions against the multi-tier framework for energy access. With the MTF obviously being important as an innovation for reminding us that electricity access is not a binary yes or no question. It is about the services you're able to access. So with cooling becoming a development climate need in high temperature areas, understanding the different service levels is, and to be honest, will continue to be important, especially as things become more efficient. This chart shows, fans, air coolers, and refrigerators are becoming viable at lower levels of energy access. But in order to make them, more affordable, and as you'll hear, we have to continue developing business models and innovative financial tools. What you don't see here is passive cooling. Passive cooling plays a very, very important role even in rural settings by reducing the demand for cooling and reducing the need for electrical cooling. So getting the most out of cool roofs, shading, ventilation, and nature-based solutions, we can reduce that need for cooling, reduce the amount of electricity that's needed to power those solutions. So with that, I'll pass over to Leo.
Thank you so much, Ben. What I really want to emphasize here is the importance of the role of innovation, as Ben just said. There really is so much that we've attempted to share in this report, and it's well over 100 pages. The initial point I'd like to pick up on is when we hear this concept of the multi-tier framework for measuring access to energy. That itself was an innovation. It was a creation in around 2013 when ESMAP partnered with others, particularly I think SC4All, in the creation of this initial expansion from electricity access being binary to do you have a good connection, yes or no? That was electrification before that point. And so the context we're setting here is for the consideration of access to cooling being seen as an innovation. By that I mean, for example, work led by Toby Peters from Birmingham University in Britain has been quite frankly leading a lot of global knowledge about cold chains. And as he puts it, it's the creation and the transport of cold nets. That's a concept that many of us need to wrap our heads around. We take it for granted, but when you don't have electricity, you largely do not have the ability to create cold, and with that, what we're talking about is innovations which improve our ability to shape our environment, which, as we could appreciate, is one of the very hallmarks of the advantages of civilization. And so that's how important this is. We have people who are unable to access the very underlying foundations of modern society, with lacking access to modern cooling technologies. We largely say technologies, so I'm going to focus on those. First off, we have efficiency increases, but also just simply technological revolutions, if you like. They aren't just increases in efficiency, but many of these are documented in the report and together they all come together in bringing to create the foundations for new opportunities, such as dramatically reducing price of solar cells, rechargeable batteries, as we're seeing lithium-ion batteries, but new lithium, sodium, and even completely new types of batteries, all the way down into the efficiency of the motors that have been popularized by the drones, by electric vehicles, and now being used in fans. Altogether, we're seeing massive increase in the energy efficiency of the components, which are essential for cooling. And one of the key parts of these are what we call ice batteries, or phase change materials, where simply the electricity changes water or a similar liquid into ice, and then the coldness is released over time. That way you do not need to create and store electricity to make coldness when you need it. You can keep coldness. And this alone has been seen as I'll go into more details on that on the next slide, but as a huge innovation. As we said, passive solutions are also needed. Here, we haven't seen so much innovation recently. In fact, the innovations are often up to several thousand years old, with a dramatic use of passive cooling before the age of electricity. So in fact, there's a lot that we can learn and be integrated into modern building solutions. I won't talk too much about the need for affordability. We go into some depth in the report, but the bottom line, of course, simply being these are the most vulnerable and typically financially challenged people in the world. Affordability to even sufficient nutrition is hard enough. So of course, affording access to cooling is going to be incredibly hard. So the solutions that are needed here really rely on public-private partnerships, the consideration of coldness as a public infrastructure, maybe like water or electricity. How do people access coldness? Whether it's in terms of a community cooling room, whether it's in terms of ice that can be taken to a home or a workplace, all of these need money, and money is in short supply. So we'll look at that on the later slides. Bottom line in the area of agriculture being that only 12% of farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa and around 30% in India are able to afford access to cooling. I'll pick up more on this later, as I say. We want to drill down now into some of those examples of innovation in the different fields that are essential, largely being the importance of business models and financing mechanisms. There's clearly a strong overlap between these, and what we're seeing now are that new means of access to finance, such as digital financing, which enables pay-as-you-go to be accessed through mobile phones, that you have a combination of a business model and financing mechanisms, for example. That also is being applied in other areas. So what we're seeing here are 3 different columns for each of the main sectors of the report, and that's the consistent theme. We've really aimed to bring together, I hope many of you are from the agriculture sector or more familiar with cooling or familiar with energy access. I'm sure very few of us if you like, overlap amongst those sectors. So the report addresses each of those separately and aims to bring things together. And so what we're learning is that it's really important to make the most of these cross-sectoral linkages, where you have, for example, experience in agriculture, providing technology innovation since the Green Revolution, but particularly as this work in ESMAP comes from the energy access space, what we're finding are huge synergies and the essential nature to build on the decade plus 15 years of experience bringing market-based solutions to energy access. These are well documented. Companies have been thriving. Now we have up to billions of dollar investment coming in, whereas we were previously just moving around with a few million. So we're really looking at how can we build on and, if you like, adapt many of those solutions. What you'll see here in the different pillars are the main, if you like, business models, which have their own financing mechanisms for each of the sectors. On the left being space cooling, on the middle being agricultural cold chain, and on the right being the vaccine space. We generally call it that because the majority of health cooling needs are for vaccine cold chains. So I'll just finish by emphasizing that we are expanding on in the report the need for a market systems approach for public-private partnership. And there are critical roles for the public sector, whether these are governments, development partners, development finance institutions, to enable what we call an enabling environment. If you like, what are the holistic elements that need to be in place as in order to give you the chance to achieve success? Again, this is all spread out, and these have been the basis for the Lighting Africa, the Lighting Global program success over the last 15 years. Basically, we're looking at the importance of access to information, consumer or stakeholder awareness raising, capacity building, business and policy development at government and private sector level, and of course, access to finance. I'm moving over to Ben now, where he can eloquently give us some of the key challenges and opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak very briefly here about the role that policies and quality assurance play in enabling access to cooling. I think you heard from Leo just now about the critical role of the public sector in sort of enabling finance. But if we can just go back to the previous slide there. So, you know, policy ambition and cross-sectoral coordination is very, very necessary. This is at times it can be a siloed initiative. And we've seen in particular that when governments address cooling, it works better when there's cross-sectoral coordination amongst stakeholders in agricultural, health, economic development, as well as rural development. Another thing, institutional coordination among stakeholders is critical. And I think the difference here is just that is coordination between different levels of government, as well as with financiers like international development financiers and the private sector. Another challenge is that substandard, inefficient, and inappropriate equipment could be financially devastating and slow progress. You know, the example here is a farmer who makes a big investment in cooling, and that product is just not up to shape, and it breaks down, and putting that investment at risk when it could have been avoided through quality assurance. The opportunities essentially they include integrating access to cooling into energy access, climate change, agricultural, healthcare policies and programs. SE4All has undertaken a little bit of work on this, on energy access and cold chain planning. You'll hear a bit more about those examples later in the panel discussion. Adopting regulations, standards, and quality assurance is, like I said, it can be very effective. And of course, the Verisol quality assurance standards is a good example of a way that can be done. And then, institutional coordination at national and local levels, including ministries, civil society, and the private sector. I would here, on the policy side, also just want to highlight the fact that cooling can be integrated into sectoral strategies for agriculture, health, rural economic development, what have you. There are also mechanisms to address cooling as a whole. Of course, there are some mechanisms through the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, but national cooling action plans have been a more and more popular vehicle, one that was highlighted through the cooling pledge that was announced last COP at COP28 by the UAE presidency and had over 50 countries endorse it. So this is one tool in that pledge. And India as well as Rwanda sort of stand out as being good national cooling action plans. There are more now. Cambodia, I should mention as well, as being plans that address cooling in a cross-sectoral, coordinated way, reaching into those different economic sectors to do it holistically. So with that, I'll turn back to Leo to conclude.
Thank you, Ben. I'll move on to the next slide. Actually, just before I do, for those of you who aren't familiar, this fancy word of phase change materials or ice batteries, there they are. Many of us know them as ice packs for where we go on picnics and such. And so these are the kind of solutions that are already in mass market scale, if you like, that just have not been adopted to solve the challenge yet. I do want to touch more on the role of innovations and how they're key, but just to focus now on this critical section. Basically, we pull together what take thankfully a lot more time in the report, and we encourage you to really go through that last few sections as Ben just had with the policies and this conclusions and recommendations. What you'll see really is these aren't just recommendations, this really is a call to action. What we are emphasizing here, as Brian mentioned at the very beginning of this work, is that access to cooling really is an essential element of basic needs. It's now we've got the new phrase climate justice, for example. I don't think we were even really talking about that some years back. But for people who have already amongst the most vulnerable in the world, suffering from both poverty and lack of access to electrification, then surely they are going to be the most challenged in terms of how to overcome this warming world. And so the work that CLASP and SE4All put together in that earlier framework really does put forward a proposal for how access to cooling could be incorporated as a basic fundamental aspect of energy access under the multi-tier framework. Now, the key recommendations we're making. So the key point is just a conclusion that I just emphasized there, that the most at risk are rural folks living off-grid who've typically challenged to access any of the Sustainable Development Goals. And cooling plays a critical role across almost all of these, you'll see, major cross-cutting theme. Now, both for economy, but also in terms of the ability to design with local materials, cooling solutions, passive cooling using nature-based solutions, simply shading from trees, or as used to be done, thatch for roofs. Many of these solutions must be prioritized in an integrated approach, such as, for example, being included in national planning strategies for schools, institutions, hospitals. It would be very easy to incorporate requirements for this and allocate budget and national training programs. As we saw earlier, there are massive advances in the technological side of a real diverse range of solutions for off-grid cooling. And many of these are, again, widely available in the West. And I'm reminded by the whole growth of the off-grid solar lighting sector started largely with camping lanterns in the early 2000s, which were developed for recreational use. And look where we are now. So I'm hopeful we have gadgets such as neck fans, we have ice packs that can be worn in vests, in hats, in bandanas, even metal plates that you can put next to your skin, which cool your body at certain positions. All of these are widely available on websites, but not in the countries needing them the most. So the key point about productive use, leave alone the individuals needing to be cooler in order to simply survive working in fields without getting injured, which sadly is actually a growing risk, and with shocking results, particularly for women if they're pregnant or even anyone who's more vulnerable. Access to cooling is essential when working outdoors, as we'll see later in some of the case from Pakistan. But off-grid refrigeration for agriculture, dairy, fisheries, and livestock produce, as well as these micro, small, and medium enterprises, offers great new opportunities to provide access to cooling while creating incomes, all in a very sustainable manner, as long as that initial access to finance can be found for what might need to constitute infrastructure loans, if you like. To buy some of this equipment, you're looking at multi-year payback. Even if the operational costs can be covered, it's the it's the CapEx costs at the beginning, which we're seeing a need for public involvement. And I'll run through the last three a bit quicker. So what we're saying, I think this is echoing Ben's earlier points, amongst governments, we're seeing they need to actually have the ambition for these policies, which itself is quite critical. These are challenging areas. We need to appreciate this. This is not something just to roll out. You do need this cross-sectoral institutional coordination, which is challenging for at the best of times. But again, in under-resourced environments at great strain, this itself needs significant attention to be overcome. And as we said, the opportunity for using quality assurance frameworks and minimum energy performance standards in order to link eligibility to subsidies, for example, or preferential treatment is critical. Finally, because we both want to create mitigation, but we also need energy where it does not exist, clean renewable energy sources that can tap in to natural resources clearly are going to be essential, particularly in these rural areas we're focused on here. And at the same time, then they minimize the high global warming potential impact of using fossil fuels. But also, to some extent, we need to find ways to minimize the use of those refrigerants that are also part of the problem. And finally, as we can't emphasize enough, the climate change situation is, if you want a better word, getting worse. These situations are going to increase, and they are compounding because a simple example is that where regions are used to heat, they're not necessarily used to hot nights because typically it gets cooler. And then bodies, we can recover. Without that alone, you're massively increasing heat risks, leave alone the dramatic increase in incidence of these challenges. So access to cooling predominantly offers adaptation benefits to the most vulnerable, while being able to be designed in a way that it further improves mitigation as well. But ultimately, this is an issue, its time's come, and we hope that it's taken up as a matter of climate justice, as well as great opportunity to create livelihoods and save lives in the rural off-grid areas. And with that, I'll close this part of the presentation and back to you, Clemencia, and get a chance for our panelists to bring this to life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo and Ben. I hope that our participants to the webinar have found this presentation as interesting and comprehensive in a nutshell, as I have, listening to you both. I think that you have brought to bear exactly both the complexity and the opportunities of bringing clean cooling as a key ingredient to a bigger pie, which could be described in a word: economic development for all and social benefits. I think that in addition to your conclusion, I would like to add perhaps more is not clean cooling, efficient cooling in off-grid areas and in rural areas and in general is not only a matter of a basic need. I can think, in listening to the work that we do in ESMAP, is that it's also a major tool to leapfrog economic development. If you think about all what you have explained, is a way to improve the means that people have at their hands to add value to their own production, to their healthcare, improve it immensely, even beyond vaccines. And in nowadays, because of perhaps people are becoming more aware or the situation is worse, or both of the above, the benefits of cooling are being also put in evidence in areas like in education. Putting it in another way, too much heat has created the need to close schools, which are not well equipped. And so I think both we can see that with the opportunities come also the sophistication of the request for cooling as an ingredient of this. So with this, I could obviously continue with all what you have said, but let me turn to the second part of the webinar, in this second part of the webinar, we are bringing to our attention, to our audience, to a set of very distinguished panelists that are going to bring to us another part that is also already been asked in the chat, which is what is happening on the ground. So with what we would like to do in this panel session is with our 4 panelists that I will introduce for sake of efficiency in time, we will answer that question. They will tell us about a specific case in specific countries, benefits, objectives, achievement, challenges of what they have been doing. And I would suggest to the audience and remind you guys that please, we have a chat for questions. Don't hesitate to write your questions as you listen to them and also to our authors. And in this way, we hope to have the time for an exchange. So the panel that we have today gathers 4 distinguished participants from different areas. And the first one is Onos Ezire, a senior health specialist in the World Bank in Africa. And there is in agriculture, the representative is our colleague Esdras Biringiro, agriculture economist working in Rwanda. These 2 colleagues are accompanied by Rahul Srinivasan, a senior energy specialist in EC4All, which has also other heads as he was before with ESMAP in the leading the cooling program as well. And then last but not least, we have our colleague Minahil Raza from the World Bank, who is specialist in energy and will focus more on the experience in Pakistan about space cooling. So with these 4 colleagues, we will go into a panel discussion in which, if it is okay with you, the objective of this panel discussion is that, having heard the presentation of the report, the different aspects that it takes, and the different areas that have to be covered to achieve sustainable result on the ground, we want now to hear from our panelists about practical cases where government, development partners, other actors such as the private sector, finance institutions, and others have taken action on expanding sustainable cooling at this nexus between different sectors. Whereas, as one of the participants has already signaled in the chat, cooling is never alone. Cooling will never be perhaps the major actor representative in this saga, but is certainly a critical ingredient and is becoming more so. We will ask 2 questions to all of the panelists. So if that is okay with you, colleagues, I would like to put on the table 1 question for you all and ask this first question. If you could each spend 5 minutes to reply and to share with you in the most lively manner your experience with the audience. So could you provide an overview of a particular project in preparation or implementation in your respective sectors that include the provision of cooling services or equipment to meet the needs of the expected beneficiaries? Please, I will give the floor to each of you, and you will forgive me in advance if I have to be very strict about the time, but I'm sure you will honor the 5 minutes. So first, Onos, to you.
Thank you very much. Just a brief about the project. First of all, to thank everyone for connecting and for giving us the opportunity to share our experiences here in Nigeria. The project is a health project, $650 million across supported states in Nigeria. Supposed to be implemented in 18 states initially, but we have grown from 18 states to 29 states. We are working in partnership and close collaboration with the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency and 27 states primary healthcare boards. The overall aim of the project is to reduce under-5 mortality by increasing access to quality immunization services, malaria prevention, and also childbirth services. Just important to know that under-5 mortality is still very high in Nigeria. It's about 102 in every 1,000 children. And one of Nigeria is rated as the country with the highest number of zero doses children all over the world, accounting, we have about 3 million children in Nigeria who currently have not received any single dose of a vaccine. And one of the reasons for this is access to vaccine. People in rural areas, it is pretty difficult to get vaccine to them because of distance, and also getting quality vaccines to them because of issues of coolness and the efficacy of the vaccines getting to those rural places. And of course, under-5 mortality is still very high. There are reports that 800 out of every 100,000 women will lost about 800 out of every 100,000. And one of the main reasons is because skilled birth attendance in Nigeria is still very low. And there are studies that show that about 45% of birth happens in the night. If 45% of birth happens in the night and we don't have electricity to provide services and light, then of course you see that the life of those women are at risk. And so we have this ambitious dream of revitalizing PHCs. And one of the key components of that revitalization is solarization of PHCs and ensuring they have cooling system to guarantee efficacy of vaccines. So what have we done? We started by, first of all, conducting an energy efficiency audit in selected states in the country and also in Lagos. And just to know that we appreciate ESMAP for being part of that analysis, because that laid the foundation for our solarization work across PACs and medical houses across the country. We aim initially to support 5,000 PHCs and 27 state warehouses and 1 national warehouse in Lagos. In short, the warehouse in Lagos is construction from scratch. And it was so important that that assessment was done because the design of the warehouse was now informed by the result of that assessment. It's now energy friendly. For example, the roofing that is being done now, it has segments in it that have reflective roofs to ensure that there is efficiency in the use of energy. Where are we today? The warehouse, as I said, is about 70% completed with reflective roofs. Of the 5,300 facilities that we are supporting to support with solar energy, about 1,437 have been supported either through the project or through other partners. There are some key learning from what we have seen, and the 3 things I want to bring out are: 1, in some of these areas, they don't really have access to electricity. And so when we electrify those PHCs, in the evening, community members bring their phones and other rechargeable items to the healthcare centers to recharge. And that is reducing the time that the battery can serve. So instead of the battery serving throughout the night, it's unable to serve through the night because community members are coming to get their materials charged. And it's a little bit difficult because you can't really stop community members from coming because the healthcare center is part of the community. So asking them not to charge is a little bit difficult. But the question now is, how do we ensure that the batteries or the system is strong, is robust enough to carry them through the night? Another experience is we find out that for some time, some facilities, we see the batteries or the solar system going bad on time. Initially, we thought it was because of poor maintenance and poor use. But we later realized that when the solar system were installed, we didn't install lightning conductor, thunder and lightning conductors. And so those, whenever there is lightning and heavy rains, it affected the solar system. So that was a learning from us that as we scale up, it's not just enough to get the PSCs with the solar system. We might also need to have installed at least some lighting conductors to ensure that those systems actually minimizes them getting bad. The third one is the installation cost and the maintenance and the installation and the maintenance cost. When we started, we didn't really consider how this will happen. The problem we now have is there's high cost of maintenance, and who is actually going to do the maintenance, and where can we get that? So we didn't really factor that into it, but it's a learning moving forward. We pause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Onos, and my apologies to interrupt such an interesting description. Many of you are getting quite a few fans, and I'm sure each of you will. So this conversation can also be pursued later, because this is the objective also of the webinar, to communicate, to increase the exchange. So whoever wants to continue the discussion with Onos in particular, and with each of you, we look forward to that. Now let me pass the word to Esdras, who will talk about the different sector, but also in Africa, where cooling plays a critical role. To you, Esdras, and thank you for your timely intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clemencia. I'll echo Onos and say thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar, which is also going to be a good opportunity, of learning, from other places, experiences. So maybe let me start by giving you a brief background of the agriculture sector in Rwanda, to give you some context and help to understand where we're coming from. The recent national census results in 2022 indicate that close to 69%, or over 2/3 of households in Rwanda are engaged in agriculture. As you understand, really a big majority of the population. This also confirms why interventions in agriculture could be a good tool for poverty reduction in Rwanda, which is still relatively high. In fact, agriculture development contributed to about 2/3 of the poverty reduction, which was observed, in the last decade, between 2001 and 2017. Agriculture contributes regularly about 25-27% of the GDP and 34% of exports. However, the productivity across most crops has stagnated or even reduced for the last 10 years. The challenges include the land holding, which still, which is really low, about 0.4 hectares for the majority, of farmers. And, this lead to other issues, like commercialization, as only about 35% of food produce is sold to markets, with post-harvest losses high, and can go above 30%, among vegetables, or even higher for other horticulture, products. So it's within that context that the bank supported the design and the implementation of the SAIP project. SAIP is the Sustainable Agriculture Intensification and Food Security Project, which is fully financed by a GAFSP Trust Fund. GAFSP, I don't know if everyone knows about them. It's the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, which is housed, in the World Bank. It's a, SAIP is a two-phase program with a total budget of $52 million. Several objectives are to increase, productivity, market access, and food security in project areas, to contribute to addressing issues that I mentioned earlier, among others, productivity, low commercialization, including, and also post-harvest losses, among other challenges. So the specific activities of the project include, to strengthen farmers' organizations. As you understand the issues around the land holding, this could be a potential solution because it helps, farmers to come together, to be able to reach scale and access, markets in a profitable way. The other activities to help increase the adoption of improved agricultural technologies, as you understand, to increase the productivity and improving nutrition outcomes at household level, because this is still also a challenge. For example, stunting among children is still relatively high, around 34%. This project is contributing to addressing this issue. Then the other activity, again, to support productivity is to support the development of small-scale irrigation technologies or farmer-led irrigation development, and strengthening market linkages and commercialization, which is really where what we're talking about today. Where it we probably talk more about this area, because by working around this area, we support also the post-harvest handling through support of investments in post-harvest facilities and equipment. And these include cold storage facilities, cold trucks, and other cold chain services, the TA around this area. So the project targets about 65,000 households or 300,000 individuals in 20 districts of Rwanda out of the 30 districts that Rwanda has. So in addition to various technical assistance interventions, the project has used a matching grant facility which finances up to 50, between 50 and 75% of eligible investments from, by beneficiaries of the project, who could be, commercial farmers, cooperatives of farmers, or SMEs, working in agriculture, especially those that are linked to farmers' organizations to buy, their produce. So the first phase of the project started in 2019, in January 2019. And
sorry, can you please try to wrap up, because we are passing the 5 minutes, but you will get, all of you will get a chance to come back and talk more. So,
yeah, no,
thanks.
thank you very much. I just need a few seconds. So then the second phase will be closing. It will be, I just started, it will close in 2026. The project implementation has generally gone well. Grants program has generated a lot of investments in greenhouse farming, mechanization of equipment, services, investments in post-harvest handling equipment and facilities, including cooling facilities, storage facilities, and we've seen a lot of increase in terms of fresh, agriculture produce, going to markets. So maybe let me stop here. I'll be happy to provide any additional insights later. Thank you.
That's now to Rahul, please. If you could give us some insights of the actual work on the ground of EC4All in cooling, in whatever projects you want to describe. And thank you for keeping to the time. Thank you to you.
Thank you, Clemencia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So as Clemencia mentioned, before I joined EC4All last year, I was a part of the cooling team. In fact, at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was a part of the World Bank's cross-sectoral COVID-19 vaccine delivery task force, along with my colleague Martina Bossi from the ESMAP cooling team. I don't know if Martina is online. So I'm going to provide 3 examples of country-level action, 2 from my time at ESMAP when I was working on the COVID-19 response, and 1 from my current initiatives at EC4All. So firstly, I'll start with South Sudan. So during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, South Sudan's vaccination rates were abysmally low. I mean, it was, I think, even below 1%. And South Sudan, we must remember, is a FCD country, which it's a fragile country. So what ESMAP essentially did was it actually mobilized more than $30 million of grants to support millions of dollars of investments, especially for FCB countries. Now, out of that, around $2 million was allocated to South Sudan. And with that $2 million, around 25 solar direct drive refrigerators were procured, essentially to vaccinate the population in the country. Now, procurement was streamlined, was fast-tracked, and we were very happy to see that solar direct drive refrigerators were actually installed in South Sudan within a year. In fact, it was well within a year. It was a great achievement to make sure that these refrigerators were in the country to absorb the vaccines that were being procured. So $2 million from ESMAP, the grant, helped inform a $60 million investment. As I mentioned, there were grants from ESMAP to inform millions of dollars of investment. So for South Sudan, it was $2 million of grants informing a $60 million investment. And the $2 million was focused on procuring and installing the solar direct drive refrigerators. But our work did not just stop in procuring and installing those systems. ESMAP also provided technical assistance to inform procurement. For instance, it provided guidance on what sort of refrigerants should be used. So it was important to do this in a sustainable manner. So of course there were solar direct drive refrigerators, but also refrigerants had to be chosen so that they were of low global warming potential. So there was technical assistance provided to inform that investment. So I think this was an excellent example of the work that was done specifically in FCB countries. The second example I'll provide is of Mongolia. And this was also a very interesting example, slightly different. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit most countries, Mongolia was not in a position to essentially store vaccines. Its central vaccine store in Ulaanbaatar was not sufficient to absorb the vaccines that were needed for COVID-19. So what did the country do? It turned necessity into an opportunity and constructed a new central vaccine store. So $50.9 million of USD additional financing was approved for Mongolia, out of which, again, $2 million was used to construct the central vaccine store. So ESMAP provided technical assistance to the Mongolia health team, but actually the implementing partner here was UNICEF. So UNICEF was the implementation partner that was helping the Mongolian government to construct the central vaccine store. So this new, reliable, energy efficient, solar ready, earthquake resistant vaccine store had a capacity of 4 times the original capacity. So 4 times the vaccine capacity of the original facility. As I mentioned, it was state of the art. Necessity was turned into an opportunity. And again, ESMAP provided technical assistance more from an energy standpoint. UNICEF, which was the implementing partner, had most of its bases covered from a health standpoint, but relied on ESMAP to provide technical assistance from an energy and climate standpoint in terms of solar specifications. Again, in terms of energy efficient mechanisms to make sure that the state-of-the-art facility could make sure that it was climate resilient and climate friendly from every standpoint. So I think and I think the key achievement here was that the facility was constructed in around 3 to 4 months. It was extremely quick. 3 to 4 months, very streamlined procurement. And I feel COVID was used, one positive factor, if I could say, was that it galvanized the energy, health, and climate practitioners and development partners to act swiftly. So I think that was, again, a very, very key accomplishment to essentially make sure that this facility was constructed in record time. It was inaugurated by the Prime Minister of Mongolia in August 2021. And once again showed great collaboration between energy and health colleagues at the World Bank, but also with other partners such as UNICEF. The third example I would provide is from Madagascar. Clemency, I hope I'm still within 5 minutes, but let me know when I'm not. Very quick. Yes.
Or we can do it for the second round.
Absolutely. I'll talk about Madagascar because, again, it's a different sort of example where at SE for All, we are working on an integrated electrification plan, which will be launched in a couple of weeks or so. In this integrated electrification plan, there is focus on cooling, on cold chains. So what this plan does is it gives a good sense of what sort of investments are needed for cold chains in Madagascar, where these investments are needed, and again, how it can be integrated with some of the other energy issues, including electrification of health facilities. We have worked quite closely with World Bank projects too, so DECIM and LEAD, to make sure that our work is in sync with other development partners in Madagascar. So we'll be sharing this link online on LinkedIn with various partners when it's ready. But I just wanted to talk about this integrated electrification plan, which is one of SE for All's initiatives in this space. I'll hand it back over to you, Valencia. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. To you, 5 minutes to talk about your experience in Pakistan.
Hi, everyone. So my experience, I would say, is more relatable because it's considering space cooling and especially for the residents. So the project I'm part of, it's the Sindh Solar Energy Project, and it was conceived back in 2018 and started off in 2019. The primary goal of that project was penetrating renewable energy sources in Pakistan, and there were multiple components to it. One of the components was adding utility scale solar to Pakistan's energy mix. The second component was regarding rooftop solar on public buildings. But the third component was primarily on energy access when it was conceived. So this is a lending project, $100 million lending project to government of Sindh, which is one of Sindh is one of the provinces in Pakistan. So the third component was on energy access, and when the team was designing that project, so we were on the 2030 goal, SDG energy for all goals. We wanted to provide this energy access to off-grid regions. But when we were designing the project and we went and we did a baseline survey, this requirement for space cooling was actually consumer driven. So one of the most significant responses in those surveys was that people needed cooling. People needed fans, people needed some sort of a cooling element to it. Initially, again, we were more interested in providing this lighting as a part of the system, a solar home kit with lighting and some mobile charging ports. But because of this survey, we integrated a fan component to it as well. So this is a standalone solar home systems that will be provided to about 200,000 households in Sindh to off-grid in off-grid regions. So because of this consumer demand, the World Bank program, it sort of reshaped how we were thinking about providing this energy access to more sort of the needs of the individuals, how cooling was one of the requirements for people to make their environment more inhabitable and more comfortable, I would say. So when this project started off, we designed certain aspects of this program where we had to applied this bulk procurement. So there was this public procurement of the solar home kits that included 3 bulbs, 1 fan, the solar 80-watt solar home system, and then this was being bulk procured in bulk through public procurement. This was done through this World Bank program, and people would so suppliers would get these in bulk procurement and then store them in warehouses, and then we were utilizing last mile distributors to go and provide these systems to off-grid regions and these beneficiaries. And even for beneficiaries, what we were targeting were bottom 40% where people who could not afford these systems. And again, this was a while back because these systems were not that much available in Pakistan, and they were very expensive. So they are at a subsidized rate of around 80 to 85%. What the consumer does pay is about 15%, which is the cost of the transportation from those warehouses to these consumer houses where they will be distributed to these people. So this is a project The key actors is obviously the key actors are these last mile distributors who will get a list of beneficiaries for all the 33 districts in Sindh, the list of those bottom 40 households that will be prioritized to buy these systems at a subsidized cost. And these last mile distributors will ensure that the beneficiaries are those that need it and can, because these are the ones that cannot pay the upfront cost of these systems. Another aspect of this project was this tailoring of the fan component, and because these were 80-watt systems, and back then when we were designing the project, the fans that were available in the market, they were like 150 watts and maybe up to 50-watt systems that were not even configured for solar system, to be configured with the solar home systems. So what we did was we had this round of market intervention where we supported the suppliers and got these this efficiency enhancement in place, where we supported the industry to manufacture these fans that could then be connected through this solar home kits, and brought the efficiency of 50 watt to like around 22 watts. So that was another aspect.
Thank you very much for this survey of the project. Colleagues, I hope from the audience that you have gotten a great flavor. I wouldn't say you know everything about each project, but it gives you, I hope, real insights of how the colleagues at the World Bank, at EC4All, and at many other institutions are working together with governments and different private and public stakeholders to advance this cooling that we discussed in the first session, the cooling facilities, equipment, and services. Now, at the risk of limiting the Q&A that we have been actively also answering, I wouldn't want to waste the opportunity to have you all together. So let me ask you a second and third question at the same time. And it's very simple. You have discussed, you have provided an overview of your projects, of what you are doing and why you are doing it together with the clients. But in reality, in addition to what you wanted to do, when you hit the actual implementation or the final stages of preparation, I am sure, like all of us, you have also encountered serious challenges, perhaps some of them completely unexpected. So I would like to ask you two things in a 2 to 3 minutes answer. First, could you share with the participants one or two key challenges that you faced when you wanted to do what you described in the previous question, and what did you do to either mitigate, address it, or work with it if you want? This is the first question. The second question is, if you have to leave the audience with a key message, what will it be, of any kind? But if you agree, like all of us, that we need to expand to actually scale up at a massive scale the provision of sustainable cooling for the different sectors that we have seen, is there a single message that you would like to leave with our audience when finishing this? So for each of you, you have 3 minutes. Please, I count on you to use your timer, but let's leave this to the audience because I think it's a very important experience to share. Again, now starting perhaps the other way around, Minahil, to you. 3 minutes, 2 questions.
Yeah, so this is where I finished my last statement. So one of the most important linkages that was developed because of this project was that when we went in the market and we went to look for this fan that would be supported by the solar home kits, we realized there was none. And then there were no standards in the market that were available. There were no testing labs that were available. There were no MEPs. for the DC fans that could have been supported. So with support from CLASP and like ESMAP funding, we did this capacity building and training programs for laboratories and suppliers as well to manufacture these fans so that like the market can accommodate this much demand. Secondly, even the specifications that were already in place, they were tailored. So for example, there are these airflow specifications that were beforehand that were under class for these pedestal fans that were made out of plastic, but because of the hot and humid temperature in Sindh, which goes beyond 46 degrees Celsius in the summertime, it often tops 50 degrees Celsius. People are more comfortable with metal blades. So we had to work both ways around. We were developing new standards, and then we were also getting the market up to speed. We were bringing in expertise, international expertise, and then there was this exchanges, and now these DC fans are available in Pakistan, and they are locally manufactured according to customer specifications. My main headliner lesson also out of this project, and should be considered during the design phase, is that talk to your target population. What their requirement is, I think, should be the top priority. Like if we had went only for an energy access project, we were not addressing their issues of space cooling. So that is my top liner from this project. Thank you
so much, Minahil. Rahul.
Thanks, Clemencia. I think when we worked on cold storage for vaccines, one thing we realized is that we had to work with the health sector, because ultimately this was a health issue. So I think the challenge was when we started working with them, we obviously didn't understand their world very much. We were immediately put into calls with WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, and all these health development partners that say the energy sector doesn't work with on a regular basis. But I think it became very clear that we could be most effective only if we worked with them, because we were solving a health issue, a development need. So I think so the way to overcome this challenge was, I think, you want to be humble, that you don't have all the answers, you don't know everything. That's totally fine. From the energy sector, it's okay to ask questions that you don't understand, especially when you're speaking with health colleagues. So be humble, be willing to learn, with the understanding that you will be most effective only if you work with them. So I think coordination, intersectoral coordination, is paramount when you're working on development issues. So I think that, to me, was the challenge we faced, and that's how we overcame it. Be humble, be willing to learn, and work together as a team, cut across silos to solve urgent development issues. I think the headliner statement to me is a related one. Talking from the energy sector, whether it's SE for all, whether it's ESMAP, I think energy is a means to an end. Unless we are willing to work on end-use sector issues, whether it's agriculture, whether it's health, whether it's education, we have to keep in mind that energy can be effective only if we work with these sectors and really work on issues from a holistic standpoint, so that we can meet different SDGs that are all interlinked, whether it's SDG 3, SDG 7, SDG 13. So I think we should work together. We should continue working together to kind of meet the different goals that our respective institutions have in mind. So I'll stop there and hand it back to Clemencia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. These are, I hope, very important, both challenges, solutions, and messages. Now to Esdras, please.
Thank you very much, Clemencia. I will try, to be brief. When our project started in 2019, some of its targeted areas were newly developed irrigation schemes, by previous projects. These were large-scale schemes, at least in the context of Rwanda, which were designed for horticulture, commercial farming. The infrastructure put in place by the government was comprehensive and included, post-harvest facilities like cold storage facilities. It was 10 of them. These facilities were planned to handle, expected huge quantities of fresh produce coming from these irrigated areas. But very soon in the implementation of the project, we noticed that the use of these facilities was really limited for some of them, while others were not used at all. So it's at that moment that we applied and got funding from the ESMAP to carry out, an assessment to identify barriers, constraining the use of, these facilities, and come up with, solutions. The study was implemented in a form of a TA, technical assistance, with an objective really to increase the uptake and, of these facilities and mainstream energy efficient cold storage, in the horticulture value chains. So the first phase, helped us to identify reasons, and we got, 3 main reasons affecting, the uptake. The first, technology-related issues. Some of the cold storage were not really reliable, functional, meaning that farmers could not, make use of them. We had the same designs across, the country, both in cold areas, in warmer areas, and, these facilities, as I said, were fully solar powered. In these cold areas, the produced energy was not really enough to power, the batteries and, for the facilities to reach the required cooling levels. So the other challenge was, the connectivity between production areas and markets, which meant really that, the demand of these facilities was really low. And the other challenge was, there was a gap, in the managerial operation maintenance of these facilities. So at the end of the study, we were able to also develop a roadmap to implement recommended actions to address these issues. So the second phase facilitated the implementation of.
Give us then, with this challenge that you have and how you solved it, what will be your message for us?
So the message really is, to understand that each, there is no solution that will fit, all, context. We need really to first do diagnostics to understand, the actors across the, different value chains, the market, of these facilities, or the cold chain services and equipment, to be able to address, identified issues.
Thank you very much, Yes. And now the last words to our audience in terms of this, back to Onos. Please, 2 challenge and a message in less than 2 minutes, please.
Okay, so 2 challenges. The first one is data still remain a huge challenge. We have limited data on solarization and cooling system. Our suggestion is that this data should be routinized. Is there a way we can start collecting basic data on cooling systems and solarization as part of the routine HMIs that is collected periodically? And the second challenge is increasing cost of installation and maintenance. Currently, the country the Naira have devalued so much within the last 1 year, and things have become very, very expensive. Not only have they become expensive, because of the high cost of the original products, we now have a lot of substandard solar system batteries and inverters because of the high cost. Our suggestion is that there should be some form of technology transfer that will help to see that in country, some of those things are produced locally. If they are produced locally, it's likely going to be a bit cheaper than when they are imported. Then secondly, we might need to standardize all forms of solar and cooling inputs, right from when they come in, maybe some form of advocacy to our regulatory bodies to ensure that minimum standards are maintained. My key message is we actually plan to solarize and to see that there are cooling systems in our PHCs. But while the country was planning along that, they didn't look beyond to look at issues of maintenance of these things. And so my suggestion is, as we plan to scale up, luckily we have just done just about 1,400. We're scaling up to do about 8,000 within the next 1 year. The issue of maintenance of this system should be uppermost. How do we go about that? Do we engage a firm to do that? Should that be done by private sector? We need to have that conversation now. Thank you very much.
More in terms of sustainability of results and local ownership. Well, with this, we come to the end of this webinar, and we hope that our audience and our participants and panelists have enjoyed it as much as I have. We thank you, the speakers, the managers, and the panelists for their intervention, and to the audience for her attendance. And we wish you all a great day, and please stay cool. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye, thank you.